March 1869, Prague, the month the music refused to die. In the narrow alleys beneath the shadow of St. Vitus Cathedral, people still whisper about a melody that shouldn't have existed. They say that even after his execution, Anton Rudin's music box continued to play, soft, perfect, and unbearably human. I didn't believe it at first. No one should. But on the night I heard it, the sound came from a room sealed for 40 years. The air outside was cold enough to freeze breath, but inside something was alive. Prague in those years was a city half asleep, its stones remembering too much blood. The wars had ended, but the gallows still stood near the Moldau River, a dark wooden frame against pale winter skies. That's where Rudin died. They called him the clockmaker of souls, not for his skill in gears or gold, but for what he built when his mind began to decay. A music box that sang in human tones. Locals claimed it was haunted, that he had trapped voices inside. But when the governor ordered his execution, the melody didn't stop. It only grew clearer. I've spent years studying that story, piecing together what little survived. The archives describe Rudin as quiet, polite, always humming to himself. His workshop stood near Charles Bridge, where fog curled around the arches like breath from the underworld. He made clocks for nobles, jewelry boxes for widows, and once a music box for a child who never lived long enough to wind it. They said he buried the child's heartbeat inside it. The first time the melody played after his death, it was at midnight. The guards swore they heard footsteps in the empty courtyard, followed by a faint tune drifting through the mist. High, trembling notes like a lullaby drowning in sorrow. When they opened his cell, they found the box resting on his cot perfectly clean, the key turning on its own. No one touched it again. They sealed it in the Museum of Instruments, locked in a glass case where it still stands. Some nights, even now, the guards say it hums when no one's near. I heard that hum once, when the air grew still and the candles flickered blue. It wasn't just sound, it was breath. And for a moment, I thought I heard words beneath the melody, words that begged not to be remembered. They said Anton Rudin's final words were not of repentance, but rhythm. Standing beneath the noose, he whispered a count, 1, 2, 3, and when the rope tightened, the sound that followed was not the crack of bone, but a faint chime that echoed through the courtyard. Some swore it was wind passing through the gallows. Others said it was the first note of his cursed melody. The witnesses didn't agree on much, except for one thing. When the body was taken down, Rudin's lips were still moving. That was 40 years ago, yet the legend refuses to die. I found an entry in the city's execution log. Anton Rudin, clockmaker, age 47, executed for the murder of Count Wilhelm Stark. But in the trial records, something doesn't fit. The Count's death was ruled poisoning, yet no poison was ever found. Only a small golden box lay beside his corpse, still playing when the guards arrived. Its tune was described as so human it made the eyes water. The box was traced to Rudin, but he denied crafting it. It made itself, he said in court. I only gave it a heart. When I first read those words, I thought they were metaphor. But after hearing what I heard in that museum, I began to think he might have meant it. The curator warned me not to go alone. He said the music only plays when someone carries sorrow in their chest. It chooses who to sing for, he said. I laughed. But that night, while cataloging old violins, I felt a shift in the air, like the room had taken a breath. Then came the sound, faint, trembling, a child's lullaby played through iron teeth. The lights dimmed. Every clock on the wall stopped at once. I turned toward the display case and saw movement. The gears inside the music box were turning backward. I could hear something beneath the melody this time, a whispering rhythm, like someone trying to form words through the spinning metal. The air grew colder. The tune changed. For a moment, it almost sounded like my name. I stumbled back, heart racing, knocking over a table of instruments. The curator burst in, his face pale. You heard it, didn't you? He asked. I nodded. Then it knows you now, he said. His eyes glistened with fear. I asked what he meant, but he only muttered, once it remembers a soul, it never lets go. Outside, the bells of St. Nicholas struck midnight, and from the locked glass case, the melody began again. Slow, steady, and mournful, as if marking the start of something that refused to end. In the heart of Prague, 1869, music was not merely a form of art. It was a confession of the soul. Every alley hummed with the sound of violins, and every tavern echoed with laughter and song. Yet there was one melody that no one dared to play, the melody of Victor Halleck, the condemned composer. Once celebrated for his haunting symphonies, Victor's music had turned darker with time, echoing grief and madness that audiences couldn't bear to hear. It was said his final composition, Lullaby for the Departed, could make the living weep and the dead stir. When the authorities executed him for crimes he never confessed to, they thought they had silenced his madness forever. But they were wrong. Victor had left behind one final creation, a small ornate music box carved from black walnut and silver, its winding key shaped like a skull. On its base was an engraving in Latin, Non moriar sed vivam, I shall not die, but live. The box was said to contain the last notes he ever wrote, captured in gears and cogs instead of paper and ink. The morning after his hanging, the box was found on the table of the executioner, though no one saw who placed it there. He dismissed it as a cruel prank and locked it away. But that night, when the clock struck midnight, faint music began to drift through his home, a soft, sorrowful tune no human hand played. His wife found him the next morning, eyes open, body cold, a faint smile frozen on his face. The music box sat beside him, still turning, though its key had never been wound. From that day on, it passed from one unlucky soul to another. Each new owner claimed the same thing, that once the melody began, it could not be stopped. Some said, it played for those about to die, others that it summoned the composer's spirit to finish what death had interrupted. By the time I arrived in Prague, the box had already been hidden away by collectors and priests, locked in crypts, buried under cathedrals, even thrown into the Vltava River. Yet somehow, it always returned. The year was 1869, the same year Victor's music was banned in every theater. And still, his melody found a way to echo through the city's narrow streets, carried by unseen hands, played by no one, and heard by all. Every child knew the warning whispered in candlelight. If you hear the lullaby, close your ears, not your eyes, for it seeks a soul that listens. The legend of Victor Halleck's music box spread across Prague like an infection that could not be cured. Priests called it a cursed relic, while scholars insisted it was an impossible machine, one that played notes beyond the scale of human hearing. But for the people of the old town, it was neither mystery nor miracle. It was a warning. The first time I heard about it was in the cellar of an old tavern near Charles Bridge. The innkeeper, a gaunt man with trembling hands, told me he once saw the box himself. He said it was no larger than a loaf of bread, polished until it reflected candlelight like dark water. It doesn't play music, he whispered, his voice shaking. It breathes. I laughed then, thinking he was drunk, but his eyes were not those of a liar. They were those of a man who had seen something his mind couldn't explain. He told me the box had been opened only once since Victor's death, by a young apprentice named Josef Marek, who worked in a clockmaker's shop near the astronomical tower. Josef was fascinated by the design, claiming its mechanism was decades ahead of its time. He brought it home, studied it under lamplight, and after 3 nights of no sleep, he managed to turn the key. The melody that came out was faint but clear, soft as a sigh, rising and falling like breathing. His wife said it made her chest tighten, as if something inside her heart was being pulled. Joseph tried to stop it, but the gears would not cease. When morning came, he was gone. Only his tools remained, scattered around the table, and the music box sat in the corner, still playing. They found him days later near the riverbank, his body unmarked, but his face frozen in horror. The box had stopped, but a small trail of blood led from his ears to the cobblestones. The townsfolk buried him with his eyes closed. Yet at the funeral, the priest swore he heard faint notes rise from the coffin. By the end of that year, 3 more people vanished under the same circumstances. No one could explain it, and no one dared touch the box again. The city council ordered it sealed within the monastery crypt beneath St. Vitus Cathedral. There, monks prayed over it daily, believing they could silence whatever voice spoke through its melody. But one stormy night, the prayers stopped. When the monks were found at dawn, every candle had burned to the wick, and the air smelled of iron and roses. The abbot's final words, scrawled in ink across a torn page, read only, "It plays for him. That was when I decided to find it, to hear the truth for myself. People said the box was lost, that it no longer existed. But I had seen the documents, the sketches, the testimonies. I knew it was real. And if Victor Halleck's soul was still trapped within its gears, I intended to meet him no matter what the cost. The deeper I searched into the story of Victor Halleck, the more the boundaries between myth and memory began to blur. Every street in Prague seemed to hum faintly with echoes of his unfinished symphony, as though the city itself remembered him. I spent weeks following dead ends, old churches, dusty libraries, private collections where relics of the condemned composer were kept like forbidden scripture. Each clue led to another whisper, another shadow. The people spoke of the music box with fear, but also reverence, as though it had become part of their history, their punishment, and their prayer. The one lead that mattered came from an old violinist named Dusan Kral, who claimed to have played alongside Victor in his final concert before the arrest. He was half blind now, living in a cramped attic near the old cemetery. His walls were lined with violins, some whole, some split open, their strings hanging loose like veins. When I mentioned the box, he froze, his hands trembling over a cracked bow. "You don't find it," he whispered. "It finds you." He told me that Victor had written his last melody not for fame, not for the living, but as a covenant, a pact between himself and the silence that waited beyond death. The music box was not meant to entertain. It was meant to hold something, a fragment of his soul, a note of his being. Dusan claimed he had seen Victor at his piano days before his capture, surrounded by strange symbols drawn in chalk and melted candle wax. The melody he played then was unlike anything mortal. It rose and fell like a voice caught between prayer and scream. He said he had written the sound of eternity, Dusan muttered. And he meant it. When I asked where the music box had gone after the monastery incident, Dusan told me of a man named Anton Radek, a collector of cursed instruments. Radek's mansion stood at the edge of the Vltava, hidden behind a grove of black poplars. He was said to own artifacts that once belonged to executioners, exorcists, and murderers. I visited him at twilight. His home was a mausoleum of sound, harps with broken strings, flutes carved from bone, drums stretched with unknown skin. He greeted me politely, but watched me like a man measuring a coffin. When I asked about the box, he smiled without warmth. "You're not the first to ask," he said, "but perhaps you'll be the last." He led me to a locked cabinet, its glass fogged from within. I could hear something faint behind the doors, a ticking, not mechanical, but rhythmic, like a heartbeat. "It started again last night," he said quietly, "and I haven't wound it in years." His hand shook as he turned the key. The sound grew louder, and when he opened the cabinet, the air turned cold enough to mist our breath. Inside sat the box, black, silver-edged, humming faintly as if remembering a song it could not finish. The Latin inscription gleamed beneath the dim light. I reached out, but Radek stopped me. "If you touch it," he said, "it will remember you." Radek's warning echoed in my mind long after I left his mansion. The image of that small, breathing box haunted me each night. Even when I tried to sleep, I could hear it, the faint ticking beneath the noise of the city, like a distant metronome keeping time with my heartbeat. I told myself it was imagination, that my obsession with Victor Halleck's creation was making me see things that weren't there. But by the third night, I realized the sound followed me. It pulsed through the walls of my rented flat, through the pipes, even through the cobblestones beneath my feet. Prague itself had begun to hum with it. I went back to Radek the next morning, only to find his home deserted. The front door was ajar, the air inside stale and heavy. Dust still hung in the air where footsteps should have been. The cabinet that had held the music box was shattered, and a trail of dark stains led from the parlor to the cellar stairs. The smell of iron filled the air. I followed it down, lantern trembling in my grip. What I found there made my skin crawl. The music box sat in the center of the floor, its key slowly turning on its own. Radek's body was slumped in the corner, eyes wide open, mouth curved into a faint, unnatural smile. On the wall behind him, drawn in something dark and drying, were the same chalk symbols Dusan had described. Loops, spirals, a circle divided by a line of notes. The melody was faint, just a whisper of metal against metal, but it carried something heavy within it, a presence. When I tried to stop it, the gears resisted. The air in the cellar thickened until it felt alive, pressing against my lungs. The lantern flickered, casting shadows that moved when I didn't. And then, for a moment, I heard words within the music. Low, indistinct, almost like someone breathing my name. I stumbled back, grabbing the box and wrapping it in my coat before fleeing into the street. The city outside was silent, the snow falling soundlessly, but I could still feel the vibration through the fabric. It wasn't just a melody anymore, it was a heartbeat, patient and waiting. I took it to the church near the bridge, demanding to see Father Kohler, one of the last monks who had guarded the relic years ago. When I showed him the box, he turned pale. "You've already heard it, haven't you?" he asked. I nodded. He sighed, crossing himself. "Then it has already chosen you." He led me to the altar where centuries-old relics were kept under heavy cloth. He lit candles and began chanting in Latin, but the moment his voice rose, the music box began to play, without being touched. The candles flickered out one by one, and the melody swelled, filling the chapel with notes that seemed both beautiful and unbearable. I felt tears burn my eyes, not from sorrow but from something deeper, something ancient. The priest screamed something I couldn't understand, and suddenly there was silence. When I opened my eyes, the church was empty. The candles were gone, the air still and cold. Only the box remained, sitting where I had dropped it, the words engraved on its base glowing faintly in the dark. Non moriar, sed vivam. That night I didn't dare sleep. The phrase non moriar, sed vivam repeated in my head like a curse. I shall not die but live. I set the music box on my table and stared at it beneath the candlelight. Its brass surface was darker now, tarnished as if it had absorbed the shadows around it. When the clock struck midnight, the key began to turn on its own again, slowly, relentlessly. The melody rose, soft at first, then clearer, sharper, an old lullaby twisted into something mournful. I heard footsteps above my room, slow, deliberate. My building had been empty since last month. Each step matched the rhythm of the song. The candle flickered and went out. The only light was from the snow outside, reflecting faintly through the window, illuminating the box. I wanted to run, but my body wouldn't move. The sound wrapped around me, each note like a whisper in my ear. Then I saw him. Viktor Halleck, his face pale and stretched thin, eyes dark like burnt glass. His neck bore the faint mark of the noose that had ended his life 3 years ago. Yet he stood before me, breathing softly as if the air itself had forgiven him. "You played it," he said. His voice wasn't a sound, it was part of the song. "Now you hear what they wouldn't." I tried to speak, but my throat was dry. He reached toward the box, fingers hovering just above it. The air bent, the candle flame reigniting with blue fire. Around him I saw faint shapes, others, dozens of them, their faces blurred but their eyes filled with pain. They stood behind him like a silent choir. "They wouldn't let me finish," he said. So I made sure the song would never end. His hand touched the lid. The melody stopped. Then all at once the silence screamed. Every object in the room rattled. The windows, the table, even the floor beneath me. The candle shattered, wax spilling like blood across the wood. I stumbled back as Victor smiled faintly. "It's not the music that traps them," he whispered. "It's the silence that follows." His face began to crumble, turning to dust that swirled around the room before vanishing into the dark. The box lay still for a moment, then began to hum again, deeper, slower, as if it was breathing through me. I realized the air itself carried its rhythm, the pulse of something alive but unseen. My vision blurred. Every sound in the room dulled except the heartbeat inside the song. My fingers moved on their own, reaching for the key, twisting it once more. The melody changed, no longer sorrowful but pleading. Behind me I heard someone whisper, "He's becoming part of it." The air grew colder. My reflection in the window began to fade, replaced by Victor's face, smiling faintly through the frost. I screamed and threw the box toward the wall, but it never hit. It hung mid-air, spinning, the key twisting faster and faster. The melody grew louder until it pierced my ears. Then all at once everything stopped. Silence fell so heavy I could hear my own heart falter. The box dropped to the floor, perfectly still. But when I looked down, the reflection in its polished brass was not mine. It was Victor's, and his eyes moved. The reflection didn't fade. It blinked, then smiled, a slow, deliberate motion that chilled the air around me. I stepped back, trembling, but the music box began to turn again, though I hadn't touched it. Its gears clicked in perfect rhythm with my heartbeat. Each click louder, closer. The air grew heavy, pressing against my chest until I could barely breathe. Then, from the brass surface, Victor's face began to push outward as if the metal itself were melting. His lips parted, and a whisper seeped through. "You kept listening." The room trembled. Shelves rattled, glass cracked, and the faint scent of burnt oil filled the air. I grabbed the box to throw it, but the moment my skin touched its surface, I saw everything. The prison courtyard, the hanging rope, the crowd's pale faces as Victor's neck snapped, the priest clutching the music box like a relic, muttering prayers he didn't believe, and beneath it all the same melody, playing faintly, endlessly, never stopping. The song had been recorded on no instrument. It was carved into flesh, memory, and regret. My hand burned, but I couldn't let go. The song was no longer just sound, it was emotion. Despair, rage, longing. The cries of everyone Victor had ever killed or loved. They weren't gone. They were inside it, inside me. My reflection flickered, showing flashes of their faces. The victims, the mourners, the executioner. I saw their eyes within mine. "You see now?" Victor's voice hissed. "It was never meant to end with me." The box vibrated violently. The floorboard split beneath me, and light poured through the cracks. Not warm light, but the pale shimmer of something cold and infinite. The melody slowed, distorted, until it resembled breathing. My own breathing. My heart stumbled, sinking with the song's uneven rhythm. I felt my pulse fade from my chest, and echo instead from the music box itself. Then I understood. The curse wasn't about haunting the living. It was about replacing them. Victor hadn't preserved his soul. He had built a vessel that needed new hosts to keep it alive. I stumbled toward the window, gasping for air. But the snow outside fell upward, defying gravity, swirling around the glass like ash. Every reflection showed Victor's face now. His eyes followed me wherever I moved. I tried to smash the box, slamming it against the wall, but it didn't dent. Instead, the wall cracked open like skin, veins of light spreading across it, pulsating to the beat of the song. "You can't destroy a song," Victor whispered from everywhere and nowhere. "You can only add to it," I screamed, throwing the box into the fire. Flames roared up, devouring it, but the melody grew louder. The brass didn't melt. It shone brighter, the tune twisting into something almost human. Then came the final note, a sharp, cutting tone that split the silence in half. The fire went out. Everything went dark. When I woke, hours or years had passed. The room was covered in frost. The box sat in the ashes, untouched. And when I saw my reflection in it, my mouth moved before I could speak, whispering the words I didn't remember learning. "Non moriar, sed vivum." The melody started again, this time perfectly in sync with my heartbeat. I realized then, it wasn't Victor inside anymore. It was me. When dawn broke over Prague, the city felt wrong. The sky was the color of bruised bone, and the river moved slower than it should have. I walked through the streets barefoot, the snow not burning my skin but sinking into it, cold seeping through bone and thought. The people who passed didn't see me, or maybe they couldn't. I spoke to them, shouted even, but they didn't flinch. Their eyes moved past me like I was mist. When I reached my building, the front door was gone. Only a wall stood where it used to be, smooth and unbroken. I pressed my hands against it until my palms bled, but the stone didn't yield. That's when I heard it again. The melody, faint but near, echoing through the alleys like it had become part of the city itself. I followed it. Every turn led me deeper into the old quarter, where the buildings leaned inward, shutting out the light. The sound drew me to the square where Victor Halleck had been executed 3 years earlier. The gallows still stood, though the rope was gone. Snow had settled thick on the platform, untouched by footprints. The melody was louder now, weaving through the wind like a heartbeat beneath the silence. I knelt and brushed the snow away. There, half buried in the frost, was the music box, its brass surface dull, its key still. I didn't remember bringing it here. My breath caught as the air grew heavy again, the world narrowing to the faint, cold gleam of metal. I whispered Victor's name. The box answered with a single note, pure and low. Then, without warning, it began to play. The song was slower this time, grieving, almost gentle, and beneath it, faint as a prayer, were voices, dozens of them. I could hear Radek, the priest, others whose faces I barely recalled. Their words overlapped, impossible to understand, but one phrase repeated through all of them. "It never ends." I wanted to run, but my feet froze to the ground. The air shimmered, and for a heartbeat I saw them. Figures surrounding me, pale and still, their eyes hollow and their lips moving in rhythm with the song. Victor stood among them, watching. But now his face was calm, almost peaceful. He raised his hand and pointed toward me. The others turned. One by one they began to hum. The sound wasn't just in the air, it was inside me, resonating in my chest, rattling my bones. I fell to my knees as the song shifted again, growing darker, faster. Then suddenly everything stopped. The wind, the sound, even the feeling of cold. I looked up, and the square was empty. Only the box remained, its lid open. Inside, where the gears should have been, I saw my own reflection staring back. My eyes blinked once, inside the box, not outside. I stumbled backward, my heartbeat echoing through the silence, syncing perfectly with the faint ticking within the brass. That's when I understood. The music box didn't just play for the dead. It played through the living. Every note was a pulse stolen, a heartbeat borrowed, and mine was now part of its rhythm. For days, or what I thought were days, I wandered the streets following sounds no one else could hear. The melody drifted through chimneys, echoed in wells, and hummed beneath the cobblestones. It wasn't loud, but it was constant, steady, and patient. Sometimes it would fade and I'd think I was free. Then a single note would rise again, soft and deliberate, reminding me it was only waiting. I saw others begin to change too. The butcher's boy who whistled as he walked home at dusk started humming the same tune without realizing it. The church bells began to toll in the same rhythm. Even the wind seemed to carry the cadence of the cursed song. Prague was becoming an instrument, and every soul within it was a string. The city's heartbeat was no longer its people. It was the box. I tried to warn them, but my words came out in rhythm, the same haunting tempo. "It's only a song," someone said, laughing. But their laughter turned to silence when their breath caught and their pulse stopped mid-beat. I saw their eyes go glassy, and for an instant, I heard their voice join the faint chorus behind the melody. The curse had begun to spread not through touch or blood, but through sound. Whoever heard it carried it. I went to the old monastery outside the city, the one where Victor's remains were supposedly sealed. The monks there had taken a vow of silence centuries ago, their tongues removed to prevent the spread of blasphemous hymns. They couldn't hear the melody, but they could feel it. As I entered, their heads turned in unison, their blind eyes open wide, faces turned toward me as if they could sense the rhythm pulsing beneath my skin. One of them wrote a message on the stone floor in chalk: "Bury the sound." I didn't understand until I saw the crypt. In the center, an iron coffin sealed with melted lead. The walls were carved with musical notation, Victor's original composition, scratched over and over until the marks cut through the stone. I placed the box inside the coffin, the air growing colder with every breath. The song grew louder, fighting against the silence. The monks began to chant, their wordless hum creating a wall of stillness. I slammed the lid shut and poured molten wax over the seams, my hands blistering as the final notes screamed from inside. The sound faded, replaced by a deep, suffocating silence. I fell to the floor, shaking. When I woke, the monks were gone. Every trace of them vanished. The crypt was empty except for me, and the faint ticking that came from beneath the stone. It hadn't stopped. It never would. I walked out into the morning light expecting peace, but the city below was quiet. Too quiet. The streets empty, the air heavy, as though Prague itself had fallen asleep. I could no longer hear the melody, but when I placed my hand against my chest, I felt it there. Steady, unending. The curse had changed. It no longer needed the box. It needed me. As I walked away, I realized something else. Every window I passed reflected my face, but behind me, just over my shoulder, Victor still smiled. For years, scholars and historians tried to explain what truly happened in Prague that winter. They said it was hysteria, that the people imagined the melody after the execution of Victor Halesh, the condemned composer. But there were documents, records sealed in the city's archives describing the impossible. One report from a police inspector detailed an entire district that fell silent at midnight, every clock freezing at the same moment the music box was last heard. Another spoke of a pianist found dead with his fingers fused to the keys, the last note of Victor's song still vibrating faintly in the strings. No one could trace the melody's source, yet it appeared in dreams, echoing through generations. Some even claimed that if you hummed the tune backward, shadows would move behind mirrors. The music box itself was never recovered. The crypt that held it was sealed, then bricked over and later, forgotten entirely beneath the foundations of the modern city. But every few decades a strange phenomenon occurs in Prague. Streets filled with soft, directionless humming that seems to come from the fog itself. Scientists have recorded the frequency, calling it a natural resonance. But when the sound is slowed down, it forms chords. And when played in full, the melody is identical to Victor's final composition. No one knows how it continues or who or what is playing it. Some locals still whisper that the song feeds on memory, that every time someone recalls the legend, the music stirs again. They say that even silence cannot bury something that was born from grief and art. For Victor wasn't just a composer, he was an echo of the city's sorrow, and his music became the voice of everything Prague had lost. Recently, a historian named Dr. Elias Marek reopened the old cathedral archives, searching for Victor's trial records. What he found wasn't a document, but a single wrapped object. A brass key engraved with the same sigil Victor had carved on his music box. When he turned it between his fingers, he felt warmth, faint and pulsing like a living heartbeat. Elias kept the key hidden for weeks until one night, he began hearing faint chimes coming from the walls of his study. The next morning the key was gone, and in its place lay a small wooden box covered in soot and dust. The melody began again that night, faint but distinct. The curse, it seemed, had found its way home once more. The night the melody returned, Prague felt alive in a way it hadn't for centuries. The fog carried sound like silk, threading through the narrow alleys and across the Vltava River. Dr. Elias Marek couldn't sleep. The music box he'd found pulsed faintly, its tune incomplete, always stopping before the final note. He tried locking it away, sealing it beneath lead and wood, but the sound seeped through, patient and calm. Within days, it began to change. The melody adapted to match his heartbeat, slower at rest, faster in panic. Elias documented everything. His handwriting grew frantic. "It learns," he wrote. "It waits." Soon others began hearing it too. Tenants in the old quarter complained of sleepless nights, claiming the walls vibrated with the sound of a lullaby no one remembered learning. One woman swore she saw smoke rise from her piano, notes carving themselves into the ivory keys. Elias tried to destroy the box. He smashed it, burned it, drowned it. But every morning it reappeared on his desk, unmarked, waiting. Then came the night of the resonance. Bells rang out across Prague, not from towers but from the air itself. Windows shattered, glass humming in tune. The city became a living instrument, its every surface trembling with Victor's creation. In the center of it all, Elias saw him, the shadow of the composer, pale and smiling, his neck still marked by the noose. "It isn't music," Victor said. "It's memory." Elias realized too late that the melody wasn't meant to be heard. It was meant to be remembered, each listener becoming part of the symphony, carrying it forward. When the police entered his home days later, they found no trace of Elias, only pages filled with musical notations. The final line read, "The song must never stop." Now every few decades, when the mist thickens and the air hums low, the people of Prague pause and listen. Somewhere beneath the noise of life, the faint tune of the cursed music box still plays, a requiem that refuses to die, and those who follow its sound too far are never seen again. They say the melody doesn't end, it only waits for a new conductor. The first snowfall of 1870 came earlier than anyone expected. Prague's rooftops turned white overnight, the same quiet shroud that had covered the city the morning Victor Havel was hanged. But this time the silence didn't feel peaceful. It felt expectant. The melody had begun again, soft, distant, weaving through the narrow cobblestone streets. People whispered about it in bakeries, in taverns, in the crowded marketplaces where warmth was traded like currency. The tune had changed. It was slower, sadder, and somehow unfinished. Some claimed they heard a faint voice within it, a man humming along. Those who listened too closely found themselves dreaming of a pale figure standing beneath the gallows, smiling as he wound a small brass key. Dr. Elias Marek, though gone from his home, wasn't gone from Prague. His journals continued to appear, pages turning up in libraries, inside church pews, and under doorsteps, each bearing the same note in red ink: "It learns through us." Priests burned them, scholars studied them, and musicians secretly played the notations written there. Each time, the melody grew clearer, fuller, alive. The more it was played, the more strange things began to happen. Paintings moved as if swaying to the rhythm. Cats and dogs howled in unison when the tune reached its final bars. And sometimes, late at night, a music box would start playing by itself in homes that had never owned one. The authorities blamed hysteria, but the people remembered Victor's name. They remembered the man who promised to compose a song that could never die. By December, the melody had reached the great clock tower of the old town square. On Christmas Eve, when the hour struck midnight, the bells refused to toll. Instead, the clock itself began to play, the same haunting tune that had once been Victor's masterpiece. Thousands gathered, frozen in awe and terror. The air shimmered with invisible vibrations. Even the snow seemed to fall in rhythm. Then, for the first time in a century, the final note played. It echoed across the city like a sigh, and every light in Prague went out. When dawn came, the bells hung still, frost-covered and silent. But below, in the city's winding streets, the people heard something strange. A faint ticking like the winding of a key. And somewhere, Inside a shuttered music shop that hadn't opened in decades, a small wooden box began to glow. When the sun finally rose over Prague, it revealed a city changed. The air itself seemed to hum, low and steady, like the breath of something sleeping just beneath the cobblestones. The snow glittered unnaturally, as though it had absorbed the light from the vanished lamps. In the heart of the old district, the door of Victor Havel's music shop creaked open by itself. No one dared enter, but those who stood near swore they heard a heartbeat pulsing from within. The melody returned, faint but precise, each note identical to the one that had played the night Victor died. A group of scholars, curious and afraid, decided to break in. Inside, everything was perfectly preserved. Dustless shelves, a lit candle that hadn't burned down, and in the center of the room, a new music box rested on the counter. Its brass was untarnished, its surface engraved with names, hundreds of them. The scholars leaned closer and saw that every name belonged to someone who had vanished during the strange nights of music. The box began to wind itself. A single note rang out, and one of the men collapsed instantly, his eyes wide open, whispering a melody no one could hear. The others fled, but the sound followed them, echoing through the alleys, spreading again like a contagion. Within hours, every bell tower in Prague began to resonate. The city shook, not violently but rhythmically, as though every brick and beam was keeping time. The people gathered once more in the square, covering their ears, praying, weeping. Then through the frozen air a new sound joined the song, a voice, soft and clear. "It's almost perfect," it said. Victor's shadow appeared upon the clock face, hand outstretched toward the crowd. Just one more note. The melody grew unbearable. Windows shattered, frost bloomed across skin, and the sky itself seemed to crack like glass. Then, as suddenly as it began, everything stopped. Silence. The kind that feels alive. The citizens opened their eyes and found the streets empty. Only the faint ticking of gears remained. Today, locals say if you walk through Prague on a snowy night, you can still hear it. A faint tune, like a lullaby played from somewhere deep underground. Some say it's the wind. Others say it's Victor, still searching for the final note. And a few, those brave or foolish enough to follow the sound, swear they see lights flickering beneath the river and hear a soft voice whisper, "Listen closely. The song remembers you."